Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Turn my service off, right now, okay. I work for a major cable internet, TV and home phone provider. The one that is probably the most hated, you know the one. The department I work in is responsible for either saving a customer or turning their services off. Call came and transferred from our tech support team, and by this time the customer was already on the phone for an hour. Tech agent was able to get service back up and running, but he was now asking for a large credit for 1 day of service out. As soon as I got on the phone it was demands: here's what you're going to do, if you can't do this then turn my service off immediately, I no longer want to be a customer. I tried to calmly explain to this very rude man that I could not credit him over $200 for 1 day of service, but would be more than happy to process a credit more appropriate. He declined, and again demanded that his service be turned off immediately. I reiterate the immediately part to him and he says yep, right now. Cue malicious compliance. I turn off all his services right there that very second. He starts screaming that he was watching that and what am I going to do without internet? I told him that I was only doing what he asked. This ended with me restoring service and giving him a credit appropriate to his 1 day outage, which we figured out was user error on his end. Next story. You have to pick me up. For context, my brother is an inconsiderate douchcanoe. It was a free day for me. I had a job with random scheduling, so it was either a weekday or a weekend. I'm chilling at home about to cook up something for dinner or late lunch when I get a phone call. 4:30 p.m. My brother called me and expected me to jump up and go pick him up from his job because none of the family were available on a busy weekend for them. When I say he expected, I mean he called me up and said the exact words, "You have to pick me up." This was before he had his own car and license, around 18. His job was on the other side of town, a full 30 to 40 minute drive or more depending on traffic, and it was at 4:30 p.m. just before hectic work traffic at 5 p.m. If I had refused to get him he would have called either of our parents and whined until I was complained. Had to go pick him up. Understanding the box I had been put in, a Grinch-like smile grew across my face as I made up my mind. What did I do? I picked him up, and then made 3 stops along the way home. 3 long stops. The first was at a gas station. I had been low on gas and he couldn't complain cause I was his only ride. At the second stop, I pulled in at a restaurant to eat inside, Tijuana Flats. The whole time he is complaining that I should take it to go and that we were only 15 minutes from home. The whole time he's whining about me wasting time and that he had to do homework. That homework took like 10 minutes and then he just passed out with his TV and Xbox on. Eventually he even called grandma to complain. So much so she called me to ask if I had offered to buy him any food while there. I did, then told him, tough, he wanted the ride, he got it. And finally at stop 3, a supermarket 4 miles from home, I needed a few groceries. Around 6:15 p.m. to 6:20 p.m., when we finally got home he complained like a jerk to our parents, Grandma and Dad, but when my dad got home from work he just laughed, gave me a high five, and was like, why didn't I ever think of that? And I was like, hey, maybe next time. I'll come along so we can make a few extra stops. P.S. He had been doing the "you have to give me a ride" thing without a please in sight for a while now, and it was starting to get on everyone's nerves. TLDR, my brother demands a ride and gets one longer than he thought he would have wanted. Next story. It's my job to deal with it. Sure. I work in public services. It was a new role, and I am the first, and only, one of me. Essentially, this means that my job scope can be pretty broad and I have a lot of fingers in a lot of different pies. I have also gained the reputation of a no-nonsense problem solver, cannot for the life of me think why, so when people have issues, they tend to come to me. I was busily hashing out a few tasks last week when I get something else slapped onto my plate. A manager of a service we commission with, appropriately named Karen, has apparently been working her way through people because she isn't getting the resolution she wants. So one of the managers in finance wants me to look into this for Karen. Now, a thing to note here is that every April we increase rates along with inflation, but she didn't get it. Thing is, it's out of our hands. The services we commission from her are funded between us and another separate public service, PS2. We pay half, PS2 pay half. But we haven't paid the increase because PS2 haven't agreed anything yet. What can I say? It's the public sector. Our team's conversation goes something like, me, hey finance manager, I can't actually do anything about this because. Finance manager, cutting me off, this is your job, it's your department that deals with these contracts, so deal with it. I don't care how, just get her off my back. Now, that's mostly paraphrased, except for that last sentence which he said verbatim, I don't care how, just get her off my back. I write in chat to confirm, I am to deal with this, and you do not care how. Finance manager says, yes, for Christ's sake. I crack my knuckles and get to work, sending her the following email and CCing in finance manager and my own manager. Dear Karen, I apologize for the delay in the inflationary increase for service. However, as this is jointly funded between ourselves and PS2, we are beholden to their financial timeliness. As PS2 have not yet agreed to the 4.1% increase, we are unable to process it. Regardless of how many individuals you contact, this will remain the case until PS2 see fit to approve. In instances such as these, our recourse should be to head down to the offices of PS2 and begin smacking naughty bottoms, but I fear HR would frown upon such action in these enlightened times. Might I suggest contacting PS2 yourself in order to expedite the process? I'm sure finance manager at MaliciousCompliance would be happy to direct you to the appropriate contact and answer any further questions. Warmest regards. My name. I then immediately got a Teams call from my manager where for 30 seconds all I could hear was laughing, and he asked me what was going on. I sent him the screenshots of the chat messages between myself and finance manager and relayed the Teams call. My manager told me that it was not, in fact, my job. How odd. And later that day finance manager apologized, but also warned me that, in the future you should probably hold back on the ball-quithering sarcasm, people might not find it amusing. I think I'm hysterical, personally. Update. I had a Teams call from finance manager. Turns out, he'd just gotten off the phone with PS2. They'd called him asking who the hell Karen is and why they received 41 separate emails from her in the past week. Seems like someone set that particular pitbull onto PS2, but whoever that person was, must have made a terrible, horrible error. Because they sent her to a completely different team that were apparently very confused as to what was going on. So they sent her to another team, who sent her to another team. She's currently being passed around like a spliff at uni housing. But here's the kicker. She's being passed off due to her nuisance behavior, that's a given, but also because PS2 can't authorize the uplift in her fees. She filled in her business address incorrectly back in January when we began commissioning with her. We have one address, PS2 have another, meaning that PS2 systems have flagged it as a discrepancy, and she's so busy demanding her money that she isn't responding to the urgent emails that the PS2 team have been sending out. There does not seem to be an end in sight. Absolutely astounding, no notes. October 10th. Next story. Planning permission. What planning permission? This is not my story, but one from another family member, Steve. I live in the UK and he lives in Canada. Around 10 years ago, I flew over to see my Canadian family and whilst I was there, was surprised to see that Steve was living in an RV with his wife. When I'd previously visited, he had been living in a 3-story house, basement, ground and first floor. On this occasion, his house appeared to be on stilts. The entire thing had been raised up by around 2.5 m, whilst a ground underneath had been excavated leaving nothing more than a big hole in the ground. I couldn't not ask why his house was hovering precariously above ground on nothing more than a dozen metal supports. It emerges that he had sought for planning permission to add an extra floor to his house. Despite literally living miles away from the nearest neighbor, this permission was rejected. He was however informed that should he wish to expand his house, he could install a basement and didn't require planning permission. Being the extremely handy and resourceful fella that he is, he had the bright idea to jack the property up and install a new basement below the existing basement. In essence, the old basement now became the ground floor. I visited 5 years later and the work was completed. I asked him if he'd ever had any issues from the planning department. He told me that they sent someone out, but given that there was nothing in the rules preventing a house being raised by a floor through being jacked up and built under, no action was taken. Next story. Okay fine, you can have Cheez-Its. Call me a bad parent if you must, lol. I thought it was funny. My daughter was throwing a tantrum last night that she wanted Cheez-Its for dinner and not her actual dinner. She's 9, far too old to be throwing a tantrum over this. After trying to reason with her and it going nowhere, I finally said, fine, you can have Cheez-Its, but they have to be the buffalo wing Cheez-Its, which is some new limited time flavor my husband wanted to try in addition to what we usually get. Her eyes got all wide and she said, but that's too spicy. She's a trooper though, and she gave it a shot, but very quickly realized she wasn't going to win after 1 or 2 of them. I gave her the choice of more buffalo Cheez-Its or her actual dinner. She chose her actual dinner on her own volition. Next story. Send me free chargers and delete all my data. Okay, so some background. I worked with tech support from a phone brand some years ago and we would sometimes send people free chargers and some other things as goodwill. It was nothing that we were forced to do, we could just do it at our own discretion. We would also log calls and ask customers for contact information and product information to do so. One day I received a call from a customer who just excreted toxic energy from the get-go. He was mad that apparently someone had promised him a couple of free chargers for his trouble but he had yet to receive them, so he demanded that I sent them to him. I asked for his phone number and email so that I could look it up, but he refused, stating that he doesn't want us to save any of his data and demanded that I would delete all the data we had of him in accordance with GDPR. I answered, but sir, I can't look up and see that we've promised you a charger and I can't process any deletion of data I don't have. He started cussing a bit, calling me unprofessional. He then gave me his name and address, which I noted down in a temporary document I created as he didn't want any information in our system. For some reason he was okay with this and I didn't find anything in our systems with that information. He then demanded that I send him the chargers for free and that I deleted all his information right after the call. I just happily agreed. We hung up and in compliance to what we discussed I deleted all the information from my document. A shame I no longer had his name or address and that I could send him those chargers. Smiley face. A bit anticlimactic as I never heard from him again, so he likely called different places to demand free stuff. I, however, still smile when I think about this past interaction. Next story. Parking payment compliance. This was quite a few years ago. I worked downtown where there wasn't any long-term parking within 2 blocks of my building. There were 2-hour meters I would use for short stops at the office maybe 3 or 4 times a week. Inevitably once a month or so, I would get a ticket because something came up at the office and I couldn't get back to my car in time. The tickets are only $15, but you only have a week to pay and then they would be $45. At the time, there was no option for online or web payment, so a check had to be mailed in. Most of the time I would get it paid in time, but I hated it when the fee would triple. I basically just considered this the cost of doing business downtown. I was also very frustrated that there was such short time frame for payment and response on my part, but most interactions from the city took months for the city to respond/resolve. My job involved working with the city regularly. I had previously asked if I could just set up an account and keep a running balance, but they said no. After about 5 years of this, I decided to set up an auto bill pay with my 2 vehicle license plates in the memo line, and it would send every 2 weeks to ensure that if I accidentally got 2 in a month, I was covered. Never again would I have to pay the $45. I guess this caused quite the headache for the parking department. After about 4 months of automatic bill payments, and them sending me back the checks that did not have any ticket to apply, I got a phone call requesting that I stop as it required a lot of research on their part and a commissioner had to sign for each check they had to send back. I asked again if I could have an ongoing account to avoid the accidental $45 fee, and they said I could not. So I continued sending them automatic payments for about 3 years after that until I changed jobs. Next story. Don't throw rank on a tournament against high schoolers, you might get malicious compliance. Picture this: high school, computer education class. Computer education class consisted, for 3 years, 13 to 15 years old, in Sinclair Spectrum computers running Logo software for programming. Then school finally upgrades hardware, we get 486 PCs with DOS, Windows 3.1 and color monitors. A whole new world, for kids 16 and 17 years old. Professor is early 30s, very serious about his craft, cool guy once you get to know him. Aide, former student that thinks he's the bee's knees and everyone should adore him, he's just somebody that likes to microbully people, but harmless because he has no real power, all power comes from Professor. Class is being taught on a long and narrow rectangular room, only windows are to a large patio, no windows to the hall, around 12 to 14 computers, each with its own desk, 2 kids per computer. The first desk, on one end of the room, near the door, being teacher's computer. Kids being kids, we bootleg copies of video games to play on the farthest side computers, since computers are really expensive and you're really lucky if you have one that good at home. Mostly football, soccer, games. We sometimes get caught, sometimes get sent out of class for the day and given a speech, but that's it since my class is comprised of above-average students. So, the day before last, Professor says, guys, since pretty much all of you have passed, tomorrow, last day of class, we're having a striker, soccer game, 6-minute games, very fast-paced, popular back in the day, tournament. Aide and myself will compete and all of you will as well. Bring chips, bring something to drink, non-alcoholic, of course, and may the best player win. The tournament starts, semi-finals end up being me against Aide and one friend against Professor. Before the games, both Aide and Professor approach us very seriously and tell us, may the best player win, but, if you beat us, we might fail you. Me and my friend laugh. They don't. I'm not about calling his bluff and risk problems. I choose Trinidad and Tobago, very bad team, Aide chooses Brazil, best team on the game. My friend goes with some mid-team I don't remember, Professor chooses Argentina, very good team. All the other students, already out of the tournament, gather around the remaining 2 computers to watch the games. Half-time, Aide is beating me 3-0. Professor is beating my friend 4-0. Aide says with a satisfaction smirk on his face, come on guys, we're bluffing, do your best to beat us, this is not entertaining anymore. But he does not know one thing. 4 of us spend around 2 to 3 hours, 3 to 4 times a week playing the game, we know every single trick, everything there is to know about the game. They're beating us because we're afraid they might pull rank. I say to Aide, but you won't fail us, right? No, do your absolute best. I look at my friend, he smirks maliciously, I smile, we say, okay, and proceed to comply. Big time. The games ended 3-11 and 4-12. Aide almost breaks the keyboard. The rest of the students are going nuts. Professor takes it like a champ. My friend beats me in the finals, nobody cares anymore. To this day I still don't know how nobody came to the room to say something about the noise. It was a perfect way to end high school. TLDR, Comp Science professor organizes a video game tournament, tries to pull rank to beat students, gets trashed in return. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel our posts.